This is Firebase. I'm your host, Gary French. Read a quote from Thomas Payne recently that seems very appropriate for today. Here's what he wrote. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in crisis, strength from the service of his country. But he that stands now deserves the love and thanks of every man and woman. Wow, how true is that? Let me share a couple of things with you before we get into tonight's program. Just this week, the Durham Report was released, and the conclusion is something that you and I, common sense Americans, have known all along, that President Donald Trump did not collude with the Russians. Let me say that again. This official governmental report came to the conclusion, years in the making, something that I have known since 2016, that President Donald Trump did not collude with the Russians. And it seems in Durham's report that all the evidence points to really an organized collusion of Trump's political opponents to harass him and attempt to defeat him. Also came across this from Family Research Council, the action. 4 more companies decided to join the national movement, as I call it, of let's see how quickly we can ruin our business and enter bankruptcy. Those 4 businesses are Target, Levi Strauss, Starbucks, and Sports Illustrated, joining forces with Bud Light, of all things. And there is the Convention of States push that's going on, which is dealing with the Article 5 out of our Constitution. Well, friends, tonight on Firebase, we are talking about the times that really try men's souls. I want to welcome you to Firebase, which is a Christian conservative talk show that discusses issues affecting every single American, and we do so from a distinct biblical worldview. We do not try to espouse anything that is merely the flavor of the week. We don't want to approach anything that deals with our personal political bias. Everything that we present is indeed with a bias, but it is a biblical bias. Well, let's get right into the things that try men's souls. My guest for tonight is a dear friend, Timothy Throckmorton, who works for the Family Research Council out of Washington, D.C. Timothy, welcome to Firebase tonight. How are you, friend?
I am wonderful, sir. It's an honor to be with you.
Oh, I just feel better talking to you. Just give me a sense of peace and comfort when we talk together, even though that these are seasons that will try our souls, my brother.
Yes, and those words echo over the centuries and land in our lap. They're true. They were true when Thomas Payne wrote them, and they're true now. And just as they inspired those who were fighting in the revolution, I think they bring great inspiration to us today as well, Gary. Thanks for sharing them.
Yeah, let me ask you real quick before we get into talking a little bit about the Durham Report. What you been up to recently? How have you been staying busy? Are you staying busy?
Yes, I've been in probably 12 states in the last 3 or 4 weeks, sharing the resources of the Family Research Council with pastors and leaders, denominational leaders, and encouraging them to speak biblically to culture, giving them the tools that we produce each and every week to do just that, bringing a biblical worldview perspective to those who are in leadership. And the good news, Gary, is that there are many who are responding to the call of the moment. They're not the sunshine soldier. They're digging in, and they're getting not only interested, but they're getting equipped to raise up community impact teams, to bring these worldview resources to their congregations, their educational departments. And I believe there's a new generation that's going to surprise us with their interest and their involvement.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that. I hadn't even thought about this when you and I were talking a little earlier about this program, but I read a report, a Gallup poll that was talking about, especially among older ministers who are getting close to retirement. It's sort of you and I look in the mirror, I guess, but they're concerned about the younger ministers that are coming along. That there's 2 considerations, I think, that the Gallup is saying, is that they're not very biblically literate, and they're not societal societally engaged, I guess, and they're more on a social justice or a social gospel. Are you coming across any of that, just as a side note?
I am, and I think they're the genuine byproduct of liberal theology that has, invaded the institutions of higher learning in denominations. So that's not surprising. What offsets it, though, Gary, I believe, is a populace. There are Americans everywhere who, on their own, are getting involved and getting educated on the issues. And that is creating sometimes friction between their pastor and themselves. And many of those folks who are getting a little disgruntled are finding other churches. Now, there are some great churches who are handing down that heritage of civic involvement, civic engagement from a biblical perspective, and that's encouraging. But you're right, there is a host of younger leaders in churches across America who are not looking at our culture through a biblical lens, but they see it through the social justice aspect, and they're not at all civically minded. They don't, for many, they don't know civics. They don't understand civics. They've been taught civics, let alone our American.
I agree with you. I think civics has been thrown out the window years ago, and I've often been an advocate of the local church during their Sunday school hour need to teach U.S. history from a Christian worldview, using the Bible, looking at the founding fathers, and some of the aspects of what it means to be politically active as a believer. There is the erroneous thought that the church should not be involved in the politics. How do you combat that? What do you do to counter that kind of a thought that's going on, Timothy?
That's a good point, Gary. And I think in America, that our history and our civics are entwined. Because we're built on a biblical foundation. That's not the case everywhere else. You can't see that in other governments, but here you got to work hard to overlook it, especially in our founding documents. And so when Franklin said to the little lady outside of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, "You've got a republic," that she asked, do we get a monarchy? Did you give us a monarchy or a republic? He said, "A republic if you can keep it." Now, I know we love that line, but keeping it is the key. And to do that, there is responsibility. There is to be responsible or to be involved is necessary. And as Franklin observed, you've got to keep this. Adams said that our documents, our government, our republic is not built for anyone else other than a moral people together. Mm-hmm. It's like putting gasoline in a diesel engine. You put the wrong fuel in, it's not going to run well. But the right fuel helps it run well. And where good governance is understood and engaged in, and biblical worldviews inserted, the people are blessed.
It makes me wonder, how did we get to where we are today? Did we just stop being involved or engaged? Did we put our head in the sand? Did we just say somebody else would take care of it, or I'm going to heaven, or did we buy into a reformed theology? Well, there's nothing I can do about it anyway.
I think the answer is yes, and. Yes, we did put our heads in the sand, but at the same time, there was a diabolical scheme to remove God from the fabric of our institutions.
That's a great point.
The Frankfurt School, over 100 years ago, began to insert itself into the ideology and thinking of our higher schools of higher learning. At the same time, we were lulled to sleep thinking that, forgetting our history, forgetting God, and buying into this new thought that, there has to be a separation here. When fake news isn't new, Gary. It's been around a long time.
That's right.
You're teaching falsehood, and it's being embraced, and embracing it and being embraced by the church made it easy for the church to say, "Okay, we don't have to fool with this. Others will, and we'll just do our own thing." And so here we are. And so I guess the answer is yes and yes.
Yeah. Well, we got about a minute for our first break. Let me ask you this question. How did the church just buy into the false teaching that we cannot be involved in politics. I know I said about putting our heads in the sand, or we've got engaged in social justice. Did we not learn from our history? Have we forgotten our history? Or are we like what the scripture says, no man who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is worthy for the kingdom of heaven? Are we like the squirrel after a shiny object?
I think we've forgotten the Bible, and the Bible is replete with instance after instance where God's men, the prophets, leaders, Jesus himself spoke to those in authority and played a role in shaping the culture. God used the church and leaders in the church to bless the culture, and we've somehow missed that in Scripture as well.
Wow, I think it's a great point. Friends, we're talking with Timothy Throckmorton from Family Research Council out of Washington, D.C. Timothy travels the nation, speaks with pastors and churches and religious leaders all across the country, and his hand is really working hand in hand with folks that are trying to make a difference in our land. When we get back from this short break, we'll talk about the Durham Report, see if we can get into some information that we've gotten about the Convention of States and a few other important topics. Don't go anywhere, friends. We will be right back. Welcome back. Glad you stayed tuned to that short break. Talking with my friend Timothy Throckmorton from Family Research Council. And we got started on the program this evening talking about times that try men's souls. Well, here's something that will either get your blood boiling or just help you to reach that point and say, I knew it was all a lie. The Durham Report was released this week, and one of the headlines it said, Durham reports deep state revelations. And it says it should shock every American. And the reason it should shock every American is because the Durham Report came out and indicated that President Trump was not guilty of any kind of collusion with Russia. As a matter of fact, here's what the report came out, and it was a 306-page report that was just published recently. It says this document from John Durham, it says it reveals the fact that President Obama, Vice President Biden, and CIA Director John Brennan, among others he includes, were all briefed by August of 2016 that the Hillary Clinton campaign had a scheme to falsely accuse Donald Trump of colluding with Russia. And Senator Ron Johnson, a stalwart of conservatism from Wisconsin, told Family Research Council President Tony Perkins almost immediately after the release of that. Here's what Senator Johnson told Tony Perkins. The FBI knew, for example, the Steele dossier contained Russian disinformation, and yet they continued on in their investigation. And here's why he says it should frighten every American. Because if they can do this to a man who's running for president and then continue this narrative even while he's president, just think what they will do to you and I as average Americans who do not have the name recognition or the financial resources. Tim, I know that you and FRC have been on top of this, and I know that your boss, Tony Perkins, has been really involved in this. What do you think is going to come out of all this? Is anybody going to go to jail, or are they just going to shove this to the side like they've done with everything else?
I hearken back to your opening quote from Patrick Henry about these times. And I look at this and I think of the layers of distrust that it causes throughout America for those who potentially want to run for office, for that matter. Then also for those who want to believe in their government, want to believe that there are some righteous leaders at some level there. And you're right, Gary. This is, if it happens to Donald Trump, it can happen to anybody if allowed to go unchecked. The hope is that there will be some progress made, as I know Jim Jordan is. I think he invited Durham to come and testify. Others are going to follow this as far as they can at this moment, being the makeup that we have with the House and the Senate and the executive branch. we can only do so much. I understand, but in the polls, the public opinion in the realm or the world of public opinion, it should frighten everybody. But at the same time, I pray that it's going to raise up new leaders that will address that type of disrespect for the law at local levels and at state levels, or district attorneys around the country, whoever they are, that folks that say this is enough, we're going to address this locally, and we want it addressed nationally. And if someone does not go to jail, I'm afraid that this is going to send the wrong signal around the country.
I think that's a great point you make there, Tim. And I was thinking about this week, as a matter of fact. I've heard some radio commentators and other hosts talking about this, and immediately everybody says somebody ought to go to jail, and you have no argument for me on that. However, odds are it's like nobody's going to go to jail. They just talk about this, but I think the real benefit is that if we can let the American voting public know about all this, because I think the American people are smarter than what the lamestream news media thinks we are. And they try to say that we're not very bright. And obviously, by the way that a lot of Americans have voted in the past, it would indicate that they're not very bright. But I think that even if the crooked politicians don't go to jail, I think there's going to be some positive repercussions out of this by just letting people know the findings of what Durham Report is all about.
It's shedding the light. Light. We know light is an agent of revealing. It brings help and understanding. That's good in every regard, and I deeply appreciate that. It's about time, many are saying. However, it is here and it's before us, and I think it brings some clarity. And though we knew all along something just didn't pass the smell test, we're now somewhat vindicated in that opinion. And I pray, and here's the hope, I guess. In America, we can make a difference still. Those who are reading headlines in other countries, they can't fix it. There's no hope for them to fix it. Here, there is still a mechanism where we can, and we can do it through the process of voting and getting involved and being more than just a sunshine patriot, but getting involved and staying to the task.
I think that's another great point you bring up there, my friend. You talk about voting as an example, and we had a primary here in Kentucky this week, and of course I voted, and there was nobody there. I was the only one at the poll that was voting at my time when it was time to vote, and I asked the people that were there, and they said, "No, it's just been real slow." And but how confident are you right now that come November this year for states that have any elections, and then next year in the presidential, how confident are you right now that these votes will actually be counted correctly, honestly?
There's never been a moment where more people are looking at it and are dialed in on potential issues that can cause an election to go astray. Election integrity is a priority in every state, with some people. So people are getting involved everywhere. I'm on a few calls each week listening to just great Americans who are working in their own states, in their own precinct, doing poll worker training, doing vetting of those who are serving on election committees. And there is an intense interest and involvement. I don't know, since 2020, it's all ramped up. More people are involved in that as well, from all walks of life. And there's more scrutiny by more people who are dialed in on this. So I think it's going to be more difficult to pull the wool over our eyes, if you will. There are also great efforts though we don't like ballot harvesting, there are efforts to work in that realm and do it, but then get rid of it at some point when we're back in control of a legislature or of a political position in a particular state. So again, more people are dialed in on this. They're watching it. They're looking. So I feel much better than I have since 2020.
Well, it sounds like from what a good friend of ours, Randy Wilson, told me once. He said, and he didn't mean to be without scruples or mean or dishonest. He said, but until we, and he's talking about Christian conservatives, learn to fight the way the forces of darkness fight, we will keep on losing elections. And he wasn't talking about that we should do like they do, but I think the ballot harvesting you're talking about means we've got to play by their rules, and we've only got about 30 seconds. Is that what you're saying? They're doing that. We're going to have to do that.
And we have in the past. There in California, Jack Hibbs, our friend Jack Hibbs out there, did a great job in a recent election. So yes, use those things that are legal now in certain states, but then when we come to the point that we're in control there, then do away with them, abolish them, and get rid of them, so that it'll be a different landscape.
Awesome. Great comment. Folks, talking with Timothy Throckmorton from Family Research Council. We will come back for our final segment this evening right after this short break. I'm going to ask a powerful question you will not want to miss. Welcome back. Wow, what a quick program this is this evening. We've talked about the Durham Report, and I made mention about some companies that are going down the let's see how quickly we can go bankrupt line. Read this recently. It says there's 4 more companies, and it says they're going to go full Bud Light. Basically, they're daring you to boycott them. And these companies are Target. I stopped shopping at Target years ago when they started their crazy stuff of woke policy of getting rid of genders. And Timothy, I read this recently. It says, this article says, the soulless company is inviting new outrage with a trans line of clothes and books with colorful messages like trans people will always exist. And pardon me, folks, but here's what they're saying. Queer, 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 queer. Cure transphobia, not trans people. And ask me about my pronouns. And it goes on, and they're recommending a book for 5 to 7-year-olds called The Hips on the Drag Queen Go Swish, Swish, Swish. Levi Strauss is going down the same direction. Starbucks. I stopped drinking Starbucks coffee years ago because it's overpriced and bitter. I mean, how much stuff do you have to put in a cup of coffee to make it taste good? And Sports Illustrated has a guy, a man on the cover posing for the swimsuit edition. And the article I read is that the woke culture really believe what they're doing, and they're just following after it. And here's a question. Family Research Council Joseph Backholm says it's because progressives are true believers, and the implication is that conservatives are not true believers. And here's what he says. He says there's actually a lot for Christians to learn here. And he says, do we believe the truth as much as they believe lies? What a powerful question, Timothy. What are your closing comments to any of that, my friend?
Well, in regard to what's happening with these businesses, Antonio Gramsci, the communist leader of centuries ago, had a 2-pronged approach. One was in the sphere of influence, and that was creeping into education and business and entertainment, replacing leaders with those with the ideology that would support a communist mindset. And it's crept into other arenas as well. Those who really believe this, and they do. I think Joseph makes a great point. They really believe what they believe, and they're not willing. They're willing to even suffer some pain for it. And the question is truly provoking. If we believe in righteousness, if we believe in truth as much as they believe in their lie, then it should compel us to engage the world that God's entrusted to our stewardship with a biblical worldview perspective that is unbending. The world at its worst, a mentor said this to me years ago, the world at its worst needs the church at its best.
Amen.
And so here we are. This is our moment to be who God's called us to be. God help us to do just that.
Amen. What you're saying, and I know that you believe this, is that there's chaos all around us. Jesus said that in the latter days we would enter into dark times, and there would be wars and rumors of wars. There would be ethnic groups against ethnic groups. There would be chaos, and there would be natural disasters. There would be sickness and pestilences, the King James says. But Jesus also said that we should not allow this world to overwhelm us. He said, be of good courage, because he'd overcome the world. Tim, is that something that you've discovered, is that Christ truly is the answer for whatever ails you?
Absolutely. If my hope was in this life only, I'd be of all men most miserable. But my hope is beyond this veil, and we can't see it. It's eternal. And as we live for Christ, as we see lives transformed, we preach the gospel, disciple believers, then this set their eyes beyond, their sights beyond this life, and God can do the rest.
Timothy, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. I greatly appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Friends, we appreciate you supporting us. Support Christian television. God bless you. Until next week.